The day my wife came back, she didn't knock. She stood on the porch with a lawyer at her side, a leather folder tucked under her arm, and a look on her face like she was finally here to collect something that belonged to her. She glanced past me into the house as if she expected to see boxes, desperation proof that we'd failed without her. Instead, she saw calm. Since we never finalized the divorce, she said evenly, "I'm entitled to half the proceeds from the house sale." For a moment, I didn't respond. My mind wasn't on the money. It was on the quiet footsteps behind me, on my son standing in the hallway listening. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He just said calmly, almost politely, "Let me handle this." That was when I knew the boy she'd abandoned was no longer a boy at all. 9 years earlier, she'd walked away for very different reasons. Back then, our house was smaller, louder, filled with the kind of tension that seeps into the walls and makes even silence feel heavy. Our son was 5. He barely spoke. When he did, his words came out sharp and unfiltered, like they hadn't passed through the part of the brain that softened things for other people. The doctors used careful language. Autism spectrum, one said. High functioning but challenging. Oppositional tendencies. My wife didn't hear the words. She heard the implications, the appointments, the therapy, the patience it would take, the life she hadn't planned for. She tried at first. I'll give her that. She sat in on sessions, read articles, nodded when specialists explained sensory overload and emotional regulation. But frustration has a way of showing itself when love runs thin. He cried too loudly. He resisted too often. He didn't behave the way other children did. One night after another meltdown over something as small as a buzzing light, she slammed her purse onto the kitchen counter and said, "I didn't sign up for this." She said it quietly, almost reasonably, as if our son were a contract with fine print she'd just noticed. The next morning she packed a suitcase. She kissed him on the head like you might kiss a distant relative. Then she looked at me and said, "You're better at this than I am." She didn't say goodbye. She didn't ask to come back, and she never sent money. The early years were hard in ways I didn't know how to describe back then. School meetings where teachers spoke slowly like I might not understand. Playdates that ended early. Other parents smiling politely while guiding their children away. At night, my son would line up his toy cars in perfect rows, whispering numbers under his breath, finding order where the world refused to give him any. I learned to sit beside him, not interrupting, not correcting. I learned that love wasn't about fixing him. It was about staying. When he was 10, he asked me one night, "Why doesn't she call?" I told him the truth without bitterness. Some people don't know how to stay when things get hard. He nodded, accepted it, and went back to his homework. That was the first time I realized he understood more than most adults ever would. We lived quietly, carefully. I worked. He studied. Therapy became routine, not a burden. His focus sharpened as he grew older. While other kids chased trends, he chased patterns. Numbers made sense to him. Systems did too. By the time he was 17, he was building things on his laptop I didn't fully understand. By 19, he was making money, real money, but he never talked about it. He never bragged, never posted, never explained. He just said once, "I want to take care of you someday." I didn't realize how close that day already was. When we sold the house for $820,000, I thought it was the end of one chapter and the start of a peaceful one. A better home, more space, a quieter life. I didn't know it would bring her back. Standing there on the porch, listening to her lawyer recite legal language, I felt anger rise in my chest. 9 years of silence, 9 years of absence, and now she wanted to be paid. I was ready to fight. But my son stepped forward steady and composed his voice even. "Let me handle this." And for the first time since she left, she actually looked at him, really looked. She had no idea what was coming next. After she left, the house didn't get quieter, it got sharper. Every sound carried weight. The hum of the refrigerator, the click of the hallway light, the way my son's breathing changed when something felt wrong to him, even if I couldn't see what it was. Autism doesn't announce itself with one clear symptom. It shows up in patterns you only learn by paying attention. The first year was survival. Mornings started early because routine mattered. Same cereal, same bowl, same chair at the table. If anything changed even slightly, the day could unravel before it began. I learned to keep my voice low and my movements predictable. I learned that rushing only made things worse. School was harder. Teachers tried, but patience wears thin when a child won't sit still, won't make eye contact, won't respond the way the handbook expects. Meetings became familiar. I'd sit across from administrators while they explained behavior plans, accommodations, and what they called realistic expectations. That phrase stayed with me. Realistic expectations, they said, as if hope needed to be rationed. At home, my son lined up his pencils by size and color. He memorized license plates. He counted steps between rooms. When he spoke, it was often blunt honest to the point of discomfort. "You're tired," he'd say, looking up at me. "Yes," I'd answer. "Because you work too much." "Yes," I'd say again. There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. Therapy became our anchor. Occupational therapy twice a week. Speech therapy once. I rearranged my work schedule and burned through sick days. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't need to understand. At night, when the house finally settled, doubt would creep in. Was I enough? Was love enough? Was staying really the right choice? Those questions never came from him. They came from the quiet. Money was tight, but manageable. We lived carefully. No extras, no impulse purchases. Vacations were replaced by library trips and long walks where he could talk without pressure. He learned best when no one hovered. By middle school, the meltdowns softened. Not gone, but less explosive. He learned words for feelings. I learned to wait them out. When he struggled, I didn't correct him. I asked questions. "What does it feel like too loud?" he'd say. "Where?" "Everywhere." So we adapted. Noise-canceling headphones, calm spaces, predictability. He wasn't broken. The world just wasn't built for him. And slowly he began to build his own. Computers came first, old ones, donated ones pulled apart on the living room floor. He'd sit for hours focused in a way that bordered on reverence. I'd bring him sandwiches and set them down quietly, careful not to interrupt. One night when he was 13, he looked up from his screen and said, "I like systems. They make sense." I nodded. "Then learn them." He did. By high school, teachers stopped calling for the same reasons. They called because he finished assignments early, because he corrected errors in textbooks, because he asked questions no one else thought to ask. He still didn't have many friends. He didn't seem to mind. When his mother crossed his mind, it was brief. She would be proud, someone once said to him at a school event. He shrugged. "She doesn't know me." He wasn't angry, just factual. The shift happened quietly. At 17, he started making money online. Not allowance money, not part-time job money, real money. He never told me how much. I never asked. He paid for his own laptop. Then he replaced the old washing machine when it broke. He fixed things without announcing it the way you do when competence feels normal. When he turned 18, I suggested college. He listened politely. "I'm learning more on my own," he said. "But I'll take classes if you want." It wasn't defiance. It was consideration. We compromised. Community college, flexible schedule. He thrived. By 19, the house felt different, lighter. Not because problems were gone, but because we weren't bracing anymore. We were living. One evening over dinner, he said, "The house is too small." I laughed. "It's been fine for years." He shook his head. "It was fine when we needed it to be." That was how he always spoke. Like someone who understood seasons. When he suggested selling the house, I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust him, but because the walls held memories. Hard ones. Earned ones. "We could get something better," he said gently. "For both of us." The number came later. $820,000. I stared at the listing paperwork, stunned. He watched me carefully, ready to explain if I asked. I didn't. We sold the house without fanfare, no celebration. Just a quiet closing and a sense of transition. I thought we were moving forward. I didn't know we were about to be pulled backward. She found us within weeks, not with an apology, not with questions about her son, but with paperwork. She stood there, older but still composed eyes scanning the doorway like she was taking inventory. When she spoke, it was precise. Since we never finalized the divorce, she said, I have a claim. I felt something harden in my chest. All those years, all that silence, reduced to a legal technicality. I opened my mouth to respond, but my son was already stepping forward. He didn't glare, he didn't raise his voice. He simply met her eyes. Let me handle this, he said again calmly. She smiled then, not kindly, confidently, like someone who thought she finally understood the situation. She thought we'd struggled, thought we were selling the house to survive, thought she was arriving just in time to take what she believed was hers. She had no idea she was about to learn what she'd missed by leaving. People think success announces itself, that it arrives with noise, with signs you can't miss. In our house, it crept in quietly the way my son did when he didn't want to startle me. By the time he was 20, I had learned not to underestimate silence. He still spoke less than most people, but when he did, it mattered. He listened more than he talked, watched patterns instead of people. While others chased approval, he chased understanding. I noticed the changes in small ways. Groceries appeared without discussion. The car repairs I'd been putting off were suddenly done. When I asked where the money came from, he shrugged. I planned ahead, he said. That was his answer to most things. He spent hours at his desk, headphones on screens filled with charts and lines I didn't fully recognize. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway and watch him work. There was no tension in his posture, no frantic energy, just focus. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. Once I asked him if he was stressed. No, he said honestly. This makes sense. That was when I realized the world had finally met him on his terms. The outside world still saw him through old labels. Autistic, difficult, socially limited. They didn't see the discipline, the restraint, the patience he'd learned from years of being misunderstood. They didn't see how carefully he chose his words, how deliberately he moved through conversations. He didn't waste energy proving himself. When he enrolled in a few college courses, professors were surprised. He didn't dominate discussions, but when he spoke, rooms went quiet. He questioned assumptions, found flaws in arguments, pointed out inefficiencies without arrogance. One professor pulled me aside after a semester and said, "Your son thinks differently." That's rare. I nodded. He always has. At home, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. We cooked together, walked in the evenings, talked about things that mattered and things that didn't. He never mentioned his mother unless someone else did. And when they did, he corrected them gently. She didn't raise me, he'd say. My dad did. No bitterness, just truth. The idea to sell the house wasn't about money. Not really. It was about closure. That house had held everything. The nights I sat on the floor outside his room waiting for a meltdown to pass. The mornings we'd faced the world together, uncertain but determined. It had served us when we needed it to, but we didn't need it anymore. He explained his plan slowly, carefully, the way he always did when something mattered. We can buy something better, he said. Somewhere quiet, somewhere we choose. I asked him if he was sure. He looked at me with the same calm certainty he'd had since childhood. Yes. When the appraisal came back at $820,000, I felt my stomach tighten. Not with greed, but with disbelief. We'd lived modestly for so long that the number felt unreal. He didn't react at all. Is that enough? I asked. He smiled faintly. It's more than enough. The sale moved quickly. Too quickly in hindsight. Paperwork, signatures. A quiet closing room with neutral walls and polite professionals. No celebration, no announcement. Just a sense that something was ending, and something else was beginning. We hadn't even picked a new place yet when she showed up. I recognized her immediately. The posture, the practiced confidence, the way she scanned the room like she was assessing value. She didn't ask how her son was. She didn't ask where he'd been living. She went straight to the point. "I've spoken to a lawyer," she said. "Since we never finalized the divorce, I'm entitled to a share of the house." The word entitled hung in the air like smoke. I felt anger rise, hot and fast. 9 years of silence, of absence, of letting someone else do the work. And now she wanted to claim credit for survival she'd had no part in. I was ready to argue. My son wasn't. He stepped forward, voice, even eyes steady. "You don't know what you're asking for." She smiled the way people do when they think they've already won. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, finally addressing him. "I know exactly what I'm asking for." She thought she did. That night after she left, I found my son at his desk scrolling through documents. His face was calm, focused. Not shaken. I asked him if he was okay. "Yes," he said. "I expected this. That surprised me." "You did?" He nodded. "People come back when they think there's something to take." I sat down across from him. "I don't want this to turn into a fight." He met my eyes. "It won't." There was something different in his voice. Not anger, not fear, certainty. The next morning he told me he needed to make some calls. I didn't ask who to. I trusted him. By afternoon he said, "I'm filing something." What kind of something, I asked. He paused, choosing his words carefully. A response. That was all he said. And somehow I knew that whatever was coming next, it wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. She returned the way people always do when they believe time has erased consequences. Confident, polished, certain she held the advantage. Her lawyer did most of the talking. A man in a tailored suit who spoke in smooth, practiced phrases about marital assets and unresolved paperwork. He referred to my son as the child and to the house as the property, as if 9 years of absence could be reduced to a few clean nouns. She sat beside him, nodding at the right moments, eyes flicking between us and the folder on the table. She didn't look nervous. Why would she? From her perspective, this was simple. A legal oversight, a technical win. She thought we'd sold the house because we were struggling. She thought we needed the money. She thought she was late to a failure, not early to a reckoning. When it was our turn to speak, I opened my mouth. My son placed his hand lightly on my arm. "Please," he said quietly. "Let me." I leaned back, heart pounding, unsure whether I was proud or afraid. He spoke without notes. "You left when I was 5, he began, not accusing, not emotional. Just factual. You didn't visit. You didn't call. You didn't contribute financially." Her lawyer shifted in his chair. She crossed her arms. "That's not relevant to property law," she said sharply. He nodded. "It is to family law." The room went still. He slid a document across the table, then another, and another, each one stamped, dated, signed. Records of therapy, school correspondence, financial statements, years of silence documented with precision. "I'm filing a petition," he said calmly. "For abandonment." She laughed then. A short, sharp sound. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied, "and so is the court." For the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. The days that followed moved fast. Too fast. Court filings, phone calls, emails marked urgent. She left messages that started controlled and ended strained. My phone rang late into the night. I didn't answer. My son handled everything with a focus that stunned me. He met with attorneys, reviewed documents, asked questions I wouldn't have known to ask. When I tried to step in, he gently redirected me. "You stayed when it mattered," he said. "Let me finish this." I realized then that this wasn't about money for him. It was about acknowledgement. In court, she cried. Not the quiet tears of regret. The loud ones. The kind meant to be heard. She talked about how overwhelmed she'd been. How young. How unprepared. She said words like mistake and misunderstanding, careful never to say choice. Her lawyer argued technicalities, timelines, jurisdiction. My son didn't raise his voice. He spoke once when asked directly. She didn't fail me, he said. She left me. The judge didn't look at her when he made his notes. The ruling came in stages. First the house. She had no claim, not legally, not morally. Then the past. The years without support, without contact, without responsibility. Her petition was dismissed. Ours was not. She was ordered to pay damages. Not a large sum. Symbolic. Enough to make the point. But that wasn't what broke her. What broke her was the rest. She lost all legal rights, visitation, authority, future claims, severed cleanly, decisively. When the judge finished reading, the courtroom was silent. She looked at my son like she was seeing him for the first time. "You don't understand," she said, voice cracking. "I did what I had to." He nodded. So did I. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter. She stood frozen on the steps, clutching her purse, eyes darting as if waiting for someone to explain how this had gone so wrong. My son turned to her one last time. "You came back because you thought we were desperate," he said evenly. "You were wrong." She opened her mouth to respond. Then she saw it. The recognition, the understanding, the truth settling into place. He wasn't the child she'd left behind. He was someone she could no longer reach. That night back home, I found him sitting quietly at the kitchen table. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes." I hesitated. "You didn't have to be so thorough." He met my eyes. I had to be clear. There was no triumph in his voice, no satisfaction, just closure. The courthouse emptied faster than I expected. People drifted away in quiet clusters, conversations low and unfinished, like no one wanted to linger in the aftermath of someone else's reckoning. My son and I walked side by side down the steps, not speaking. There was nothing left to say, not yet. Behind us, I heard her voice. "Wait." I turned. My son didn't. She stood a few feet away, makeup smudged, now confidence gone, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The lawyer who'd arrived with her earlier was already gone. He'd shaken her hand politely and left without looking back. She was alone. "I didn't know," she said, her voice thinner than before. "I didn't know you'd become this." My son finally turned to face her. "This?" he asked calmly. She gestured helplessly. "Successful, strong. I thought you were struggling. I thought you thought we needed you," he said. She swallowed. "I thought you needed money." There it was. The truth exposed without malice. She hadn't come back for him. She hadn't even come back for me. She'd come back for what she assumed we lacked. And she was wrong. The official ruling arrived 2 weeks later, stamped and final. No claim to the house, no share of the sale, no retroactive rights. But that wasn't all. The court found her legally responsible for abandonment. The years without contact, without support, without even a birthday card. The judge's language was precise, unemotional, and devastating in its clarity. She was ordered to pay damages. Not enough to ruin her, but enough to remind her that choices carry weight. Enough that she couldn't pretend this had all been a misunderstanding. The divorce was finalized by court order, not mutual agreement. Clean, absolute, every remaining legal tie severed. When I read the document, my hands shook, not with anger, but with disbelief. After all those years, it was over. She called again after that. This time there was no lawyer, no posturing. "I don't want the money," she said quickly, as if racing against the click of a hang-up. "I just want to talk. I want to explain." My son listened in silence from the other room. I could feel his presence even when I couldn't see him. "Explain what I asked." She hesitated. "Why I left." I closed my eyes. I'd heard enough explanations in my life. Enough rationalizations dressed up as regret. "You already did," I said quietly. "You said you didn't sign up for it." The line went silent. Then she asked the question she'd been avoiding since the beginning. How is he doing? Not is he okay? Not can I see him? Just, how is he doing? He's doing very well, I said truthfully. She exhaled a sound caught somewhere between relief and grief. I heard something she said. About a magazine. About his name. I didn't answer. You should be proud, she added quickly. I am. That was the moment something hardened in my chest. You don't get to be proud now, I said, not unkindly, just honestly. You chose not to be there. She started to cry then, real crying this time. Quiet, uncontrolled. I made a mistake, she whispered. Yes, I said. You did. And I hung up. That evening my son sat across from me at the kitchen table, papers spread neatly between us. The court documents, the financial summaries, the future laid out in ink. They ordered her to pay, he said, tone neutral. I know. He studied my face. I don't want it. I looked at him surprised. You're entitled to it. He shook his head. I don't need it. I understood what he meant. The money was symbolic, but so was refusing it. One choice would tie him to her anger. The other would cut the cord clean. She doesn't deserve to be punished forever, he said after a moment. Just stopped. I thought about the nights he'd spent pacing his room as a child, the questions he'd learned not to ask, the way he'd grown strong without ever becoming cruel. You don't owe her mercy, I said carefully. He met my eyes. I know. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, familiar. Finally I said, if you let it go, it should be because you want peace, not because you think you owe her anything. He nodded. That's why. We filed the request the next morning. The damages were waived. The severance remained. She would pay nothing and receive nothing. No financial claim, no legal standing, no future obligation from the son she'd abandoned. When the confirmation came through, my son read it once, then closed the file. It's done, he said. A week later, her name appeared in a different context. Not in court records, not in legal notices, but in a short article she hadn't expected to see. A feature in a national magazine. A list of innovators under 30. A brief profile with a photo I recognized instantly. My son standing calmly confident, his expression steady and unmistakably his own. No mention of her, no acknowledgement, no space left for revisionist history. She saw it. I know she did. She texted once. I didn't know she wrote. I really didn't. My son read the message, then deleted it without replying. That was his answer. That night we sat on the back porch, the air cool, the house quiet. The future stretched ahead of us wide and unburdened. You could have taken everything I said softly. You had the right. He shook his head. I took what mattered. I smiled, feeling something settle deep in my chest. Not victory, not revenge. Resolution. After the verdict, life didn't explode into celebration the way movies promise it will. It slowed down. That surprised me. I'd expected noise calls, messages, maybe even anger spilling over. Instead, there was a strange stillness, like the moment after a storm when you step outside and realize the air feels cleaner than you remembered. My son returned to his routines almost immediately. Morning coffee, quiet work, long walks in the evening where he organized his thoughts without needing to say them out loud. Success hadn't changed him. If anything, it had made him more deliberate. The world, however, began to take notice. Invitations came first. Interviews requested through email, carefully worded and persistent. People who hadn't known his name a year earlier suddenly wanted his time. He declined most of them. I don't like being watched, he told me once. I understood. He'd spent most of his life being observed for the wrong reasons. She tried again, indirectly. Not through lawyers this time. Through acquaintances. Old friends who hadn't spoken to us in years but now reached out with gentle questions. I heard she's struggling. She didn't mean for it to go this far. She's still his mother. That word still carried an expectation. I listened. I nodded. I didn't argue. And then I said the same thing every time. She made her choices. My son never asked me what people were saying. He didn't need to. He'd learned early that outside noise only matters if you let it in. The magazine feature came out on a quiet Tuesday. No fanfare, no press release, just a headline and a photograph that captured him exactly as he was, calm, focused, unbothered by attention. Innovators under 30, the ones who see what others miss. He didn't frame it, he didn't share it online. He saved the article as a PDF and went back to work. But she saw it. I know because she showed up at the courthouse again the following week, not to file anything. Just to sit in the waiting area staring at a copy of the article folded and unfolded in her hands. She didn't see us. We weren't there, but the image stayed with me. A woman finally realizing what she'd walked away from, and that there was no door left to knock on. Legally, everything was finished. The court issued a final order severing all remaining ties. No future claims, no obligations, no expectations. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. That more than anything felt right. Some endings don't need speeches. We moved into the new house at the end of the month. Not the biggest one we could afford. Not the one with the highest fences or the flashiest address. A quiet place with wide windows, a backyard that stayed shaded in the afternoon, and enough room for both of us to breathe. On the first night, we ate takeout on the floor. No table yet. No rush. "I like it," he said, looking around. "So do I replied. There was no echo of the past here. No memories attached to the walls. Just space. One evening as we unpacked boxes, he paused over an old photograph. It was from years ago. Him at 8, standing stiffly beside me at a school event, unsure where to place his hands. I remembered how tightly he'd held onto my sleeve that day. "You kept this?" he asked. "Of course." He studied it for a long moment. "I don't remember her much," he said quietly. "Just pieces." I waited. "But I remember you," he added. "Always." That was enough. The last message from her came months later. No apologies, no demands, just one line. "I hope you're happy." He showed it to me, expression unreadable. "I am," he said after a moment. Then he deleted it. Not out of anger, out of certainty. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not pushing harder for punishment, if I regret letting the damages go. I always answer the same way. No, justice doesn't have to be loud to be complete. She lost access, lost entitlement, lost the story she told herself about being right. What we kept was simpler and heavier, peace, clarity, and the knowledge that love given consistently can outlast abandonment. On a cool evening, not long ago, we sat on the porch, watching the sky darken. "You know," he said almost casually, "if she'd stayed, I might not be who I am." I thought about that, about how hardship shapes some people and breaks others, about how leaving and staying are both choices, but only one requires courage. "You became who you are because you were allowed to be," I said. He nodded. That too. We sat in silence after that, comfortable and unburdened. The past didn't haunt us. It simply no longer belonged to us. Her regret didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. First through silence, the kind that lingers when even excuses have run out. Then through the slow leak of information she couldn't control anymore. Friends who stopped calling, invitations that never came, doors that stayed closed no matter how long she stood in front of them. And then came the name, not spoken aloud at first, just printed. My son's name appeared in places she never expected to see it. Industry articles, financial newsletters, conference agendas, always followed by titles she couldn't reconcile with the memory she carried in her head. Founder, innovator, visionary, under 30. The world had caught up to him while she was still explaining why she'd left. The most painful moment, I think, came when it became unavoidable. A local paper ran a short feature about successful young minds who grew up right here. There was his photo again. Calm, confident. A quote beneath it that made my chest tighten. I didn't need to be fixed. I needed someone who wouldn't leave. She saw that one. I know because she showed up where she shouldn't have. At a community event she used to attend years ago, back when she still believed she belonged everywhere. She stood near the back, clutching a folded program, eyes locked on the stage, as my son spoke briefly about his work. Not about money, not about success, about patience, about systems, about how some people learn differently, and how that difference can become strength when it's not punished. Applause filled the room. She didn't clap, she couldn't. Later someone told her, not kindly. They mentioned the magazine, the list, the age. Forbes under 30, they said, like it was casual, like it didn't carry the weight of every moment she'd chosen not to be there. Her face, I was told, went pale. She left early. She tried one last approach after that. Not to us, to the story. She contacted a journalist offering context. Wanted to share her side. Wanted to explain the hardship, the overwhelm, the misunderstanding. The response was polite and final. We're not doing a profile on that. The narrative had moved on. So had we. That night my son came home later than usual. He looked tired, not drained, just thoughtful. She was there, he said quietly, setting his keys down. I know. He nodded. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We sat for a while, the house quiet around us. You ever wonder, he asked after a moment, what would have happened if she stayed? I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said. But I don't dwell on it. He exhaled slowly. Me neither. Success didn't make him arrogant. It made him selective. He chose projects carefully, turned down partnerships that felt rushed or hollow. He remembered what it felt like to be treated as a problem instead of a person, and he never forgot who stayed. When people asked about his family, he answered simply, "My dad raised me. No elaboration, no bitterness. Just truth." She faded after that. Not dramatically, no public collapse, just a gradual disappearance from places she once occupied easily. The world is unkind to people who build their identity on entitlement. Eventually, it stops noticing them at all. One evening, as we watched the sun drop behind the trees, my son handed me his phone. An article, another list, another mention. I waved it away. You don't need my approval. He smiled faintly. I know, but I want you to see it anyway. I did, and I felt the kind of pride that doesn't inflate the chest, the kind that settles deep and steady, the kind earned over years of staying. There was no final confrontation, no tearful reunion, no apology that fixed anything. Life didn't circle back the way people expect stories to do. It moved forward. Months passed, then more. My son's work continued to grow, but not in the way people imagine when they hear words like success. There were no luxury cars in the driveway, no flashy announcements, just steady progress, long hours, careful choices. He built things that lasted because he knew what it meant when things didn't. Sometimes late in the evening we'd sit on the porch together, not talking much, just listening to the quiet, the kind of quiet you only appreciate after years of noise. One night I asked him something I'd wondered about for a long time. Do you ever feel angry? I said. About her. He thought about it longer than I expected. I did, he said finally. When I was younger. When I didn't understand. And now, he shook his head. Now I just see it clearly. Clarity, I'd learned, was stronger than anger. The last legal document arrived without ceremony, a notice confirming what we already knew. All legal ties were severed, no future obligations, no expectations. She was no longer listed anywhere in his life. It felt strange to hold that piece of paper, to see something so personal reduced to a few lines of formal language. But it also felt right. Some bonds aren't broken in anger. They're released. I asked him once if he wanted to reach out to her, to say something, anything. He considered it, then shook his head. "She knows," he said. "And if she doesn't, that's not my responsibility." There was no bitterness in his voice, only boundaries. The world continued to recognize him in small ways: articles, invitations, quiet nods of respect from people who understood what he'd built and how rare it was. He accepted praise politely and moved on. What mattered more to him were the letters. Parents of children like he'd once been. Kids who struggled with noise, with routines, with being misunderstood. They wrote to him because he represented something they hadn't seen before. Proof that difficulty wasn't destiny. He answered as many as he could. "You don't need to be fixed," he wrote more than once. "You need someone who stays." I read one of those emails over his shoulder once and had to look away. As for me, I learned something too. Staying doesn't make you a hero. It makes you present. I didn't change his nature. I didn't create his talent. I didn't make him successful. I just didn't leave. And sometimes that's everything. On a quiet Sunday morning, as sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, he poured coffee for both of us and said, "I'm glad you didn't give up on me." I set my mug down carefully. "I never thought of it that way," I said. "There was nothing to give up." He smiled, a small, genuine smile. That's why it mattered. We don't talk about her much anymore, not because it hurts, but because there's nothing left to say. She made her choices. We made ours. The difference is ours built something. If you're listening to this and you've ever been the one who stayed when someone else walked away, if you've ever loved a child who was labeled too much, too difficult, or not worth the effort, I want you to know this. Staying counts, even when no one notices, especially then. And if you've ever been the child who was left behind wondering what that said about you, it didn't say anything about your worth. It said everything about their limits. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect or share your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences matter more than you think. And if you'd like to hear more stories about quiet strength, family, and the kind of justice that doesn't need revenge, consider subscribing. You're always welcome here.